Hey there, welcome to the DFS build. This is where we go over the entire NBA DFS main slate over at DraftKings, hopefully pointing you in the right direction and helping you win. If anything we do here helps, please hit the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, and come join our Discord for updated core plays and just friendly advice from everybody else there trying to win. And if we help you get a big win, hit that super thanks below the video and maybe throw something back our way. All right, let's get to it. Let's first help you win before we ask for any more money coming our way. Lots to like on this slate, but also a lot to monitor. There's some key players who could be out. SGA and Jalen Williams are questionable. They're probably the two biggest ones because if either of them are out, the other one looks amazing. And then also we could look at the value for OKC. And if both of them are out, I mean, we're going to be stacking up the Thunder across the board tonight. Also, PG-13, Paul George, he is questionable as well. So we want to keep an eye on his status because without him, Maxey would look really, really good. And then a bunch of other Sixers would pop too. So let's get to it. I'm going to go team by team though, because it's just a 5-game slate. And then I'll give an overall view of how I view this slate. So starting with the Sixers, the matchup with the Bucks is not as friendly as it once was. They only have a 105.5 implied total. No Joel Embiid. Yabu Yuseli missed the last game. Paul George missed the last game. So, if one of those guys are out, the other one being in, and they would look good. Drummond played 23 minutes against the Pacers and was just not productive whatsoever. He was, in theory, a decent play at 5K, but the fact that he just wasn't productive and didn't play a ton of minutes, that would certainly give me cause for pause to go back to him. But in theory, if Yabu is out again and Drummond starts against the Bucks, he would be an okay play at 5K. Up top, Maxey looks good no matter what with no Embiid. He has a monster usage rate, a really nice ceiling, and he'd be facing Dame Lillard quite a bit. I think Andre Jackson is back for Milwaukee, though, so they could put him on him. And that could be a bit of a problem. So Maxey is, Maxey's solid. There's nothing wrong with Maxey if you want to play him. 52, 46, 59. He's been very, very good without Embiid, but he also, he can have a low floor because he's a little bit scoring dependent. It doesn't always get those peripheral stats we really want from a guy that's going 10K. So I think Maxey's a totally fine play, especially if he's not going to be owned. But at almost 10K, I would much rather go do something else on this slate and just maybe attack the Sixers and get exposure to their value, or Paul George if he's in. If Paul George is in, I much prefer him at 8K. You're saving 1.7K for a pretty similar projection, pretty similar usage rate, and right now he's not coming in with any ownership. So I would imagine that changes if we know for sure Paul George is in. But either way, I think he looks really good at that price point. Yabu at 5.3K with no Embiid. If he's in, I think that's a pretty good value. He'd be up there with some of the better values of this, relatively small slate. So he is solid. If he and Paul George are out, Kelly Oubre is going to be a really tough guy to get away from. I liked him yesterday at 5.8K. His price has come up 300. He's still rock solid. Not going to have a monster ceiling, but if he can get you 35 fantasy points at that price, I think that's a win. Eric Gordon, that's a big no. The minutes are okay with their injuries. You would definitely need Paul George to be out to feel good about him. Ricky Council is the guy that I'd be looking at if Paul George misses again. He was in auto play yesterday at 3K and he got 38 fantasy points in 36 minutes. So if he's going to get that kind of run, I would definitely take a chance on him. His price has not budged. He's still only 3K. So he looks really good. Justin Edwards got 21 minutes yesterday. He busted. But again, if Paul George and or Yabusele are going to be out, I think he is a solid value too. And this game does have a 13-point spread. So if you think the Philly is just not going to show up here because Milwaukee has been kind of blowing teams out lately, then Edwards off the bench at 3.4 is not the worst pivot away from Council. If you're going to fade the Sixers and all that too. But as a recap, love Paul George at the price. He's probably the top guy for the Sixers I want. If he's out, I really like Council again. And Maxey is okay. Don't mind getting to Maxey. I just don't see him as a priority for me right now. On the Milwaukee side, Giannis projects like a boss, just like he always does. Now, truth be told, Giannis has not been that freak in DFS that he has been in recent years. Like he certainly can offer that ceiling, and he projects better than anybody on this slate. But he also hits his floor a lot more frequently than we've seen in past years. That said, very expensive at 11.6K, but the matchup without Joel Embiid is not bad at all. And nobody projects better than him. And given other welcoming situations on this slate, he might get overlooked a little bit. So I don't really want to overlook Giannis. I think he is a pretty good high-level leverage play against what could be a very chalky Sabonis. And then, of course, you have Lakers guys on this slate. and possibly SGA. So if Giannis is going to go overlooked, I have a lot of interest in Giannis. Damian Lillard, only 8.5K. His price is not budged, even though I think he did pretty well against the Raptors. Yeah, 49 fantasy points. Been pretty good form lately. Price remains really nice. He'll be matched up with Maxey, so that's not bad for him whatsoever. Pushing a 50-point fantasy projection, not very owned right now, so he looks totally fine. Do not mind getting him at all. I definitely prefer him to Maxey at this price point. Middleton, decent usage rate. The minutes are capped, so I think at 5.3, he's a fair value. Like, there's nothing wrong with him pushing 30 fantasy points. If he's going to go overlooked, I don't mind going there. Him and Yabu look like pretty good options there at that 5.3 price. If Middleton were to sit, Bobby would look a lot better at 5.2. With Middleton in, Bobby is not really on my radar, but he's not the worst play just because he does have a decent usage rate. At this point, though, I think I'd prefer Brook Lopez if I was going to play a secondary Bucks player. Brook is cheaper than Middleton and Portis, and he projects about as well. So I think he's kind of interesting. Worth wondering how much he would actually be needed, just because Drummond only played 23 minutes last night, so maybe Philly goes a little bit smaller or something. So, but at 4.8K, I think he's a decent value for sure. All these other guys, AJ Green, Taurean Prince, Gary Trent, I think they're all just kind of the same. They eat into each other. I think one guy is out. Let me check real quick. AJ Green. So AJ Green will not be in. So a few more minutes to go to Taurean Prince and Gary Trent, and maybe Jackson, but they all feel really, really thin. I think Prince would be the one I would look at the most. And of course, if you feel like pretty confident that Trent is going to get 5 to 10 extra minutes with AJ Green's 20 minutes coming off the board, then you never know. For tourneys, I think Gary Trent is a little bit interesting. Just obviously all he does is score. So you would need him to pop off quite a bit. And what's he been doing lately? Very erratic. That is who he is. So if you want to try him in tournaments at that price, it's not the worst thing in the world. Just not something I feel amazing about. Brooklyn against OKC. This is a 17-point spread. Brooklyn with the 99 implied total. You don't see that very much anymore, but that just shows you how bad they are. They do have Cam Johnson back. Nick Claxton's there. D'Lo has been pretty good for them, and Ben Simmons should play. Let me just double check the status of all these guys. Okay, so Cam Thomas remains out. We already knew that. Cam Johnson is questionable. If Cam Johnson is out, it's very unlikely they have any chance of keeping this game close. Probably unlikely anyways, especially if OKC comes in at full strength. Another reason, though, for OKC to not rush back Jalen and SGA if they're still iffy. So keep an eye on that for sure. But on the Brooklyn side, none of these guys are getting monster minutes. Some of them are limited. Some of them are just not good. So I don't really want to put a lot of faith in Keon Johnson, Noah Clowney, Zaire Williams, like all these guys. They just feel bad, and they're kind of like a little bit overpriced for the inconsistency and low limit projection. So right now, the only guy I have on my radar for the Nets would be D'Angelo Russell. And even him at 5.9K with a minutes limit, it doesn't feel amazing. So I'm pretty much away from Nets. The only way I'd go after D'Lo or any of these other Brooklyn guys is if a bunch of them were out, or if the Thunder guys, like the top Thunder guys, all sat, and we could maybe hope for a more competitive game. All right, so on the OKC side, SGA projects very, very well. He has the second best projection of the entire slate, right behind Giannis, and he's 1.4K cheaper. So if he's good to go, and we don't have any reason to believe he's limited or anything like that, it's a great matchup, and he looks like a way better stud, points per dollar wise than Giannis. So I like him a lot if he's in. If he's out, Jalen Williams would pop really, really well, coming in with a nice projection at only 8.2K. He's also questionable. So it's just like monitor that situation. If one is out, the other one looks amazing. If they're both out, then Lou Dort, Kason Wallace, and Aaron Wiggins would benefit the most. And none of them are more than 4.5K, so they all would be borderline core plays. Kason and Dort probably more so than Wiggins, but Wiggins would be right there. Like, it'd be very, very close. All these guys would be liable to go off against the Nets. And there's also Isaiah Joe at 3.6, Alex Caruso at 3.5, and then you can even go down to Jalen Williams and Kenrich Williams as well. Everybody here would look really, really good against the Nets, and they'd all get a ton of usage and a ton of minutes. So not that they'd be safe, because a lot of these guys are pretty thin plays in general, like pretty scoring dependent, specifically Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins. If they don't score a lot of points, they're probably going to fail. But without SGA and or Jalen, they would look really, really good, and would open up a lot of value, or open up a lot of room for you to go get other studs on the slate. For Washington, Sacramento, this game has, I think, the second worst spread of the slate, which is always scary, especially when you're considering playing a 7.7K Jordan Poole. He got some revenge on the Warriors last night. I wouldn't be shocked, going up against De'Aaron Fox, a good defender, that he comes back down a little bit here. But just as I said in yesterday's video, Jordan Poole is a high usage, high ceiling player. So when he's filling it up offensively, he will pop off, and he can definitely get you. He can definitely surpass this 7.7K salary big time. Not so sure this game stays close. I think it's more like I'm stacking the King side of this. But if you do want to get a lot of Kings like Sabonis and Fox and all these guys, then having a run back or two for Washington isn't the worst thing, because obviously if you're paying a lot of money for Sacramento guys, you're assuming that they get there, that they produce over their salary. And if they're going to, that means this game is probably close, and that somebody on the Washington side is also going to benefit from it. So Poole's the first one to look at because the projection's really good and he's not carrying ownership. But then you have a couple other guys that are pretty interesting too. Koulibaly is getting good minutes. It's only 5.5K. Kyle Kuzma, his minutes are a little bit capped, but he's only 6.1K and projects decently for the price. I think Koulibaly is probably the guy I'd prefer there between the two because the projection's so similar and he's just a lot cheaper. Not safe plays, but if you're going to be firing up a lot of Kings, I don't hate it at all to have a run back or two. You could also just punt with some guys like Keyshawn George or Jared Butler and just hope for the blowout and hope those guys get run. Another guy also, Alexander Sarr, his minutes are capped, but somebody is going to be needed down low to try to stop Sabonis for sure. Could be a game where we see, Sarr, start with JV, or Sarr hit the bench and JV starts too. So in the event JV starts, he would look awesome at 4.7K. But as things stand, Washington is not really on my radar. If I had to go at them, it'd be Poole and then maybe Koulibaly. I think Kuz also isn't in there in that mix, but his minutes cap makes him a little bit less appealing. I'm not going to waste a lot of time on Sacramento. They'll look amazing. The Wizards are bad across the board defensively. They give up a lot of 3-pointers. They give up a lot of rebounds. They give up a lot of production inside. So Sabonis, Fox, Monk, DeMar, Keegan, all those guys look awesome. They're all different price points. The only thing I'll say is Sabonis is pushing 10K. So if Sabonis is going to be as chalky as he's projecting at 37%. If you're entering a single entry, probably much more than that, to be honest. So he's not a bad play if you want to eat that chalk. That is like high level stud wise. That is fairly good chalk because the Wizards are just a matchup that everybody dominates. But because he's so owned, you could certainly make the argument to, go for Giannis at like maybe potentially half the ownership, or go to SGA, who's only a little bit more expensive and projects better. And also would be less owned too. So Sabonis is a great play. If you want to play him, I'm right there with you. Like, I have no problem with him. I certainly will get a lot of exposure to him. But there are other studs on this slate, so I do not mind being underweight on Sabonis due to ownership and price. If I have to pick a King to play up top, it'd be Fox. He projects not that far away from Sabonis, but you can save 1.3K in terms of price. And then he just feels like a better play than somebody like Maxey, and he's comparable to Dame and some of the other guards too. So Fox looks really, really good. If I had to pay up for a King, he would be the one. Monk and DeRozan are very, very similar. So pick your poison there. They just can be a little bit inconsistent. DeMar has a very low floor on this offense because he's fourth in the pecking order at this point. I think DeMar might go a little bit overlooked as far as all the Kings go. So I think he's an interesting tournament play. But I think Sabonis, Fox, and Monk is where you want to live when it comes to Sacramento. Keegan's really interesting at 5.1 because you get very cheap exposure to a bunch of minutes in a smash spot. So Keegan Murray is borderline core play territory for me. I'll finalize it later in the day, but he looks awesome at this price with those minutes in this matchup. So he's going to be very hard to get away from. I just feel like he's easy exposure to this game. And right now he's not carrying any ownership. So that is very interesting. There's no Derek Carter, which he surprisingly was getting 15 minutes off the bench. So Keon Ellis gets a little uptick at 4.1K, and we can even potentially look at Kevin Huerter at 3.6. Huerter is actually a really interesting GPP flyer for that reason, and also the fact that this game is pretty likely to blow out. So if it does, Huerter could get a few extra minutes off the bench. Trey Lyles at 3.4K is worth mentioning too. He's coming off the bench, and he'll get extra minutes here if the game blows out. So I think they're okay GPP dives, but not, obviously not super safe and not necessarily priorities. Lakers and Clippers is not a good matchup for the Lakers. Obviously, we have Kawhi back here too. So the Clippers defense is going to be a little bit more formidable. We'll note that James Harden and a bunch of these guys are questionable. Leonard so far is in. Let me just make sure. Yeah, Harden is questionable. Norm Powell is questionable. Zubac is questionable. So even Chris Dunn. So the Clippers are potentially going to be extremely undermanned. So depending on who's out, we can look at a lot of those guys. But I click the Lakers first, so we'll go to the Clippers in 1 second. Before we do, Anthony Davis and LeBron soak up most of the usage. They look good, even though the matchup isn't that amazing. I think my lean would be towards LeBron because you're saving almost 1,000, and the projection's very similar. But both are in play. If you want to play Anthony Davis at no ownership as a pivot off of Sabonis, I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. Especially if Zubac is out. If Zubac is out, Anthony Davis is going to look amazing. Zubac is a pretty good defender, and he's going to eat up a lot of those rebounds. But if he's not in there, they don't have anybody to stop Brow. That's just not going to happen. So if that were to happen, if Zubac is out, Anthony Davis might end up quickly becoming my favorite stud on this slate. As it stands, though, if Zubac is in there, I'm not super interested in Davis, and I'd rather play LeBron. Austin Reeves popped off for 38 real points in his last game. He's been awesome. Even when he's not good, he's still getting like 36 to 40 fantasy points. Has a pretty good ceiling as that third high usage guy for the Lakers. Like, this offense just runs through these three dudes. So if you want to play Austin Reeves, that's fine, but his price has come up, so I just don't think he's a priority. Max Christie continues to be a pretty good value at 4.5K, just getting really rock solid minutes. Look at all these minutes he's getting. He does have a low floor, but at that price point, I do not mind taking a chance on him due to the minutes. Rui Hachimura at 4.9K. He also gets pretty good minutes. I think I prefer Christie here, but Rui is in play. Nobody else really stands out because you just never know who's going to get the minutes between Finney Smith, Connect, and Gabe Vincent. All right, so Clippers side, Harden projects really well if he's in. He's a little bit too cheap at 9.2K. The Lakers are a good matchup, so I would like him quite a bit at no ownership. Even with Kawhi back, I think, honestly, you could argue either way. You could argue that, Kawhi being out increases Harden's usage, but then Kawhi being in, might lower his usage a little bit, but it might make him also a more efficient player in general. So if Harden is in at no ownership in this matchup, I do think he looks like a really good play. Zubac is still a really nice price. Zubac, though, does get a usage hit with Kawhi in. So his ceiling is just lower. I think he's still okay at 7.2K, but if he's in, you got to factor in the fact that he's being matched up with Anthony Davis, and that's not exactly ideal because he could get into foul trouble and just lose out on peripheral stats and stuff like that. So not a priority for me, but he's okay. Kawhi still too limited for me to take the dive at 7.5K. Kind of out on Norm with Kawhi in there. So if they're at full strength, I don't have a ton of interest in the Clippers, and I think Harden would be the only one I'd really be looking at. But if these guys are out, I mean, if Zubac is out, we could consider Mo Bamba as a punt at center. That would not feel great. Let's see, what was he doing in the last game? 16, 17 minutes. Like, the role is just not massive either way. They might just kind of go small as well. But that would be potentially in play if Zubac is out. If Harden and or Norm end up sitting, you could definitely look at KPJ, Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn if he's in, Amir Coffey. All these guys would be viable. Kevin Porter Jr. would be the one that would stand out the most for sure, though. There's even Terrence Mann too. But I think if Harden is out, I'd be looking at Norm also, if Norm is in that situation, and then the KPJ would stand out the most. The reality is there's 4 key players for the Clippers that are questionable. So we just have to keep an eye on that and then update the projections and see who pops the most. But those are the guys that I think would benefit. All right, last game of the night feels like one of the most stackable games of the slate. It also feels like due to the Kings ownership, it's going to go really overlooked. So normally I would not be that excited to play a Blazers game because they are liable to get blown out against anyone. Certainly could still get blown out here because this is a 7-point spread. But it also has a 337.5 total, and the Bulls are a team that plays super fast and do not defend at all. So across the board, I really, really like this game, and I'd be overweight on a lot of these options, assuming I have the funds to get there. Obviously, we have SGA and Giannis and Sabonis and all this stuff. So if you go there first, it's going to be a little bit difficult to prioritize all these guys in like the 8K range, like Vooch or Levine. But they all look good. Kobe White at 6.5K. I think that really the thing you have to look at is who is going to be active for the Bulls. So Levine, I think he's probable. So just keep an eye, because sometimes lately in the NBA, probable doesn't mean probable. So we want to keep an eye on that. Lonzo is questionable. That could be big. And then we have Taylor Horton Tucker. He's questionable, and that's not that big of a deal. The big one is Lonzo. If Lonzo is not in, Ao Dosunmu could get a little bit more burn. He had 28 minutes in his first game back. Well, he had 25 in his first game back, and they ticked it back up to 28. So if Lonzo's out, I bet Ao gets over 30 minutes here. But with no Lonzo, I think Josh Giddey's minutes would be a little bit safer. So at 6.8K, he seems solid here. But the guy I would feel the best about is probably going to be Kobe White. Kobe White is 6.5K. 38 fantasy points last game. His ceiling has not been amazing, but if he gets a little bit of extra minutes with Lonzo not there, I like that quite a bit, and the matchup is really good. Just consider that so far he is the highest owned bull. So if you don't want to just eat the chalk to end the night, you could certainly pay $300 more for a high ceiling guy like Josh Giddey. Just also consider he's extremely volatile. Levine and Vooch project well, so if nobody's going to be on them, I do not mind getting to them either. My lean would probably be towards Vooch, just because I think he has a clearer path to the double-double bonus. If DeAndre Ayton is out, I think he could just absolutely feast in this matchup. He's at $100 cheaper, and he projects better. So a lot of reasons to like him a little bit more. And then, if Lonzo's out, maybe a few more minutes get to somebody like Patrick Williams, but not really a guy I feel like I need to get to. All right, Portland looks good here. The Bulls are an awesome matchup. As long as the game stays close, these guys could easily top their projections. All of their projections are pretty weak, but that's because they're at risk of getting blown out, and they are just not very consistent performers. Of everybody they have to offer here, the one that stands out the most is Scoot Henderson. He's been amazing. He is way too cheap for who he has become. 59 to 52 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games, and even his floor game of 29 was pretty darn good. So if he's going to get a bunch of minutes against the Bulls, I like Scoot quite a bit. Let me just double check the status of some of these Portland guys. Denny Avdia, I think, is still... He missed Saturday against. He's been out like last 2 or 3 games. He's got an ankle issue. He's questionable again to play here. DeAndre Ayton's questionable. Donovan Clingan is out. And now Robert Williams, the Time Lord, is also on the injury report. So I don't know what the Blazers are going to do if those guys are out. I guess Jabari Walker would get dusted off at 3K, so that would be kind of interesting. And then they have Duop Reith as well at 3K. So one of those guys could get a spot start here if Ayton and Williams are both out. Williams did get the start yesterday for Ayton. He only played 20 minutes, but that game was also a blowout. So 20 fantasy points in 20 minutes. If Robert Williams is back in there and starting at 3.1K, I like that quite a bit. And the nice thing is you can really just slide him in, assuming you are open to taking the risk of Ayton possibly playing. You could play Robert Williams, and then if Williams is out and Ayton is out, you could just drop down to whoever starts, whether it be Duop Reith or Jabari Walker. Both are solid point per minute guys, and they'd be very, very cheap. So I like that strategy quite a bit. Tumani Kamara remains an okay price, but the return of Jamari Grant kind of cuts into him potentially. 26 and 30 minutes the last 2 games. Hard to really gauge if Jamari Grant's return changes things that much for him, just because the last 2 games have been blowouts. But Jamari Grant did play 25 minutes in his return, so I wouldn't feel super great about either of them, to be frank. Anthony Simons, Shadon Sharp, and aforementioned Scoot Henderson, they're all relatively cheap for the matchup, so I think they all look really, really good. No problem getting to all of them. Right now, Shadon Sharp feels like the priority, but if that's where everybody's going, I think Scoot is flying a little bit too much under the radar in this spot. And, of course, if you think the game is going to blow out, you could go look at Delano Banton, who had 31 fantasy points 2 games ago and still remains a palatable 3.5K. All right, so overall, I think there's just a crazy amount of options available on this slate. I think the big news comes down to SGA. That's the big thing. That's the biggest thing I'm looking for sure. And then the Paul George news too is somewhat impactful. I'm not really on Maxey, even if Paul George is out. I think it's going to be more interesting to maybe get to somebody like Ricky Council again at 3K flat. And then I would probably be making, if SGA is out, I'm looking at Jalen Williams and or those OKC values. And then in general, I think I'm just going to be underweight on Sabonis. He's an awesome play, but he's really, really chalky. We can go get Giannis at less ownership. We could get SGA at less ownership. We could get Anthony Davis at less ownership. So all those guys look really, really good as things stand. And then, of course, the Clippers. That's going to be tough because that game isn't until 9 Eastern. We're going to have to project a little bit here. But you could certainly play Anthony Davis anyways, and then in the event Zubac is out, Anthony Davis will just look absolutely glorious. And then to wrap things up here, I think I'm just going to play for Robert Williams with DeAndre Ayton possibly missing here. And then if he's out, I just still have a $100, I'm eating $100 to go down to whoever ends up getting the start instead of him. And in the event Ayton is in and Robert Williams is in, Klingon is out. So Robert Williams would still get at least 15 to 20 minutes, and he's a good per minute guy. So I think it's an okay risk as things stand. That said, it's a little bit early still, and things are going to change. So keep an eye on the Discord chat to see what ends up happening and what core plays we finalize before we wrap things up. All right, so hopefully this helps you out. If it did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and come join our Discord, and hopefully we can help you win tonight. All right, thanks for watching, and good luck.